minor difficulties getting the stream started, but I feel feisty, spicy, ready to go and get your feedback. I got some stuff to say. Let's get to the after show. Hey everybody, hope you're having yourself a great day here on this Tuesday. We just got off the air on RealAg Radio 147. Great show, lots of fun, great guests, great perspectives as always. But I'm a little bit biased. That's okay. I can be biased. It's all good. We are live here as always on the RealAg After Show. So if you have any questions, comments, perspectives, we'd love to hear from you. Just drop them in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter. Just YouTube and Twitter. That's all we do the after show on. You wouldn't believe how it's raining here. It is like something like a Florida hurricane. It is crazy here in Lethbridge today. This is day 2 of an actual rain event, I'll call it. Calgary, the city of Calgary has declared a state of emergency. We go from like drought, and that's an emergency, to the state of emergency that we have now here. So crazy stuff. Unbelievable. I hope you're having yourself a great day out there. We had 3 guests that are all different, but in some ways they all kind of connect and mesh, which is kind of strange because they're all kind of a little bit different. So we heard from Dennis Laycraft, Executive Vice President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, talking about, my words, okay, this is my opinion, an absolute nonsensical idea by Health Canada potentially warn consumers that ground meat, and in Dennis's case, beef, is high in saturated fat. Like, as if that's what consumers are really worried about today. And I can go into a whole tirade about, I think they're concerned about being able to afford their house and there's inflation. But let's just stick to the food space. Even if you just take it in that pillar, I am not sure that this is something that consumers are really asking for. In the interview, I compared it to, when you go to the gas pump and it says, warning, may contain 10% ethanol. Should I be worried? Is that something that I should be concerned about? Why are they warning me? That's how it is with this situation with beef labeling. Unbelievable. And the other part of it is, Canada's the only country that's doing this. That's the other part. There's lots of times where we take the lead from places like Europe, and we're like, oh, if Europe's doing it, this must be great, right? In this case, it's just us. Dennis brought it up in the interview that there's a lot of ramifications of this. There is issues with trade. There's issues with competitiveness. These are real factors that are just, I don't know. This has got a lot of outrage. And the other part of it is it's moved into the mainstream. And so I have seen a lot of articles and people commenting on social media about how, what are we doing? Just people just not getting it. I think when you think about the PR battle here right now, I think the meat industry in Canada, at least the way I perceive it, is really winning the PR battle with this one right now. Then we heard from Willie Van Solkema, who did a project for the Saskatchewan Stock Growers Association talking about packer capacity. And specifically, could a province like Saskatchewan, could they support a packing plant in the province? And Willie kind of talked around a little bit, but he did give the opinion that 1,000 head a day kill capacity is something that Saskatchewan could support. But if you do build something that big, or get some sort of notion you could build a bigger one, you need to have your sales strategy figured out. And I support that wholeheartedly. I think a lot of times when we talk about this, as being on the producer end of the equation, we focus on the kill capacity. We want more people bidding on the cattle. That's really what our goal here is. we are sort of disconnected from the fact that you also have to sell the cattle. You have to sell the meat that's going out. And it's not just always we think about the T-bone and the ribeye and all of those kinds of things. It's the whole carcass value. And if you're going to go, like Willie said, if you're going to be at 1,000 head or more, you're going to be up against the big boys. That is JBS and Cargill from a Canadian perspective, but there's also the Hiram plant, there's the Pasco plant, maybe possibly we can put Greeley, that JBS plant in there too. But you're competing against the big boys who have global networks, so you better have your plan. Not to say it's impossible, but you really, really need to have your plan. He also made a really good point that having an investment partner, a good partner, is the key here. And that partner needs to be somebody that is essentially patient capital. Right now, there's this sort of, there's an attraction to this idea of expanding capacity because there's been a lot of consolidation, but there's also been very, very high financial margins for packers over the past, we'll say 2 years, 2.5 years, I guess maybe is it almost 3 going back to that Kansas fire. That is not been the norm. Traditionally, it is a very, very thin margin business. Up $20, down $20. Up $20, down $20. That is not these realities of today are just not historically what has been the case. So Willie says it very, very clearly. He is not some academic. Willie's worked in the business. He was general manager at XL Foods. So I think we should take what he says with great weight when we talk about packer capacity. If your idea is to build a plant, get it operational, and 5 to 10 years later just flip it, you're looking at the wrong partner. Patient capital, somebody connected already to the food business, maybe not in the beef business, but somebody that has some sort of connection to the food business would be an ideal partner. We also talked with Greg Northey. He is the vice president at CAFTA. He is also with Pulse Canada. Talked to Greg lots about transport issues, grain transportation. The Ag Transport Coalition, that is very much Greg's file. And he's over in Geneva. We recorded it this morning. And he's at these WTO ministerial meetings and trying to go through kind of what some of the important things are from a Canadian agriculture perspective at these WTO meetings over in Geneva. And we really highlighted the enforcement part of all of this. And that essentially being, it's okay to have trade deals. It's okay to have dispute resolution. Does that dispute resolution have teeth to it? Does it have enforcement to it? And we've seen Europe do this to Canada. We have a CETA agreement. We have a trade deal. And they just sort of we got a deal, but this is what we're going to do. And here's our non-tariff trade barriers. Sorry about that. Sorry about your luck. And then continue to ship product to us. That we need better teeth. We also have to have, from a WTO perspective, we need to have velocity, timeliness. That is also, I think, one of the stigmas around the WTO. The U.S. has been pushing heavily for reforms around the WTO. Canada is a country that talks a lot about rules-based trade and the need for rules-based trade. Now, the Americans may laugh at us and say, Canada, you should take your own advice. Look what you're doing to us when it comes to the USMCA and dairy. But all countries definitely have that sort of hypocrisy when it comes to their trade policy. The U.S. and China, they can say rules-based trade, but they can afford to be cowboys. They can afford to just do whatever they want because their economies are so big. People cannot ignore them. You can't ignore the U.S. You can't, for the most part, ignore China. Countries may say, "Hey, we're not sure about China," but people are doing business there. Okay. So Canada needs that rules-based trade, and the WTO is one of the mechanisms for that. At the beginning of the show, and if you have any comments on any of that, please drop them in here and participate in the conversation. I'll get to as many of those as I possibly can and get them here on the air on the after show. At the beginning of the show, we talked about this story that we have up at RealAgriculture.com, focused on the federal government giving $100 million to basically to BHP for their $7.5 billion potash mine at Jansen, Saskatchewan. $100 million is a lot of money, but in the grand scheme of things, of $7.5 billion, it's it I guess puts lights in it. I don't know, but the money, according to the story that we have up on the site, is the company said it will use the funds to purchase electric rather than diesel machines and other equipment that will operate with lower emissions. So what was interesting is prior to the show and during the show, we were getting a bunch of tweets from people. Basically, I asked the question, what are your thoughts on the Fed's committing dollars to the BHP plant? Does it show support for agriculture, show commitment to increasing domestic fert production required to decrease fert emissions, or is it just unwarranted corporate welfare? Well, I would say that the message we got from the audience is fairly clear. Majority of you believe it is just nothing but unadulterated corporate welfare, and people asking the question, what the heck? Why did this money, this $100 million, need to go to BHP? And I'll read you some of the comments here. So Braden kind of got this going by Braden saying BHP has net revenue over $11 billion last year. I shouldn't be surprised with the government, but that's a gross misuse of taxpayer dollars. Hashtag is it necessary? Tweeting as at O2 Farms SK says, go look at where the money is earmarked. It's corporate welfare. Trevor says, listen to the news report last night. Going to be carbon neutral by such and such day. The greenest mine in the history. Hire 20% indigenous people, etc. Blah, blah, blah. Who checks up with them in a few years to make sure it is done? Once again, you know what? So, yes, exactly. That is a good. That should be the question on all of this kind, like any kind of funding that goes out, Trevor. I think it's not just this project. It's all types, and that's the part that routinely that is missing. Okay, and that gets back to compliance enforcement, right? So we're focused, and this is how all the things connected today. We're talking about trade deals. It's about enforcement. It's not the announcement is fine. It gets a headline. We covered it. There was a huge parade of politicians and the corporate officers were there. It's all good. I'm glad that BHP. I'm not even sure. I don't even think I have a problem with the money. Okay, I will have a problem with the money if the money isn't actually used for what it was supposed to be used for. Why they gave them the dollars in the first place? Is giving the money justified? I totally understand what everybody's saying. My head hasn't gotten to that point yet. When my initial reaction to this is, I understand why the government's doing it. I think they're, a part of a lot of the tension is on the equipment as it pertains to greener technologies like electric engines instead of diesel. Somebody had pointed out here that mining lithium is not emission free. I don't know where that's somewhere in here. That's a very good point. But I think another part of this actually is too that the government is politically interested in showcasing that they support the domestic production of fertilizer at a time where there's very confusing things out there. They're also talking about a 30% fertilizer reduction on emissions. And so some of this doesn't add up. This is the same thing that the Prime Minister got attacked about when he was down at the Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. How can you say you're doing things for the environment? Meanwhile, you bought a pipeline and you're trying to push Canadian oil exports, energy exports. So, and I'm not being critical on that. That's just the criticism that is flowing their direction. Jack says here, there never seems to be checks and balances to make sure corps follow up with their side. Remember millions given to Omnitrax to fix Churchill rail line. They took the money and buggered off. Was that the plan all along? No private person can do that with government dollars. David says, I think the same thing happened with Bacardi in Ontario, took government money, then closed their facility and moved production overseas. Dale says, the money was for buying electric instead of diesel equipment. Correct. If electric is better, why do they need the subsidy? All that is, those are all great comments. Those are all fantastic perspectives, and they really do round out the discussion here on this topic. And I think it's very, very important that we're asking some of these questions. And it is kind of interesting. The question about if it's better for the why did they need the subsidy? And probably the gap there is that there's not the ROI on that new tech, possibly at this point. I guess there is the carrot and there's the stick. In this case, there's the carrot, which is just, here's the money. And we'll see if there's more of. I got a tweet from, I don't know if I have it it's in my personal account, so just give me a second here. Let's see here. Where is it? Chris McLaughlin, who a regular listener of RealAg Radio, Chris asked, it will be interesting to see if the federal government is willing to offer similar levers of funding to reopen the potash mine in Sussex, New Brunswick. So that's another interesting part about all of this, is that if it was good enough for BHP, who else comes to the table to say, hey, where's our money? We'll install this green tech. We'll do this. We'll use the money as we see fit. Time will tell how all of that works out. Let's see here. I'm gonna give me a second. This is fun doing we started doing this yesterday, and it really is. Oh, here it is. Okay, so let's see. Go here. Okay, Gary says, and hopefully, Gary, you're getting that rain down there in McGrath. Gary says, I don't think we need to subsidize FERT companies. Last year, if you look at their books, it was all-time record profits. Question, why would government want to subsidize them, need to spend carbon tax dollars? Good question, Gary. I think, as I said, I think a big part of this is that they also want to show that they can say, hey, they are supporting domestic fertilizer production at a time with everything that is happening with Russia, specific to potash, because Russia and Belarus are such big supporters big producers of potash. This fits very much in line with that political point that they are trying to make about moving away from all things Russia and Belarus, which I think, which most of you will support. But that's the politics side of it, is the way that I would see why they're doing that. But they are, like we said, they're walking this fine line. They're walking this sort of this wire, right? Like they're like a trapeze artist walking across the Niagara Falls in terms of being industry friendly, but also, trying to appeal to the most environmentally conscious of people, because hey, there's lots of people that vote Liberal that will detest. They will detest this money going to BHP to support synthetic fertilizer. There's just no question about it. So don't think that all Liberal voters are somehow in favor of this decision, this announcement. It's also interesting that Nutrien is another company that has also announced that they're expanding their potash production. It didn't come with any sort of, and I don't know if Nutrien asked, or they did or they didn't, whatever. There was no announcement. There was no parade of politicians attached to that expansion mention that we had going back probably probably a month and a half ago. So there's there is a lot at work on that. I wanted to get to a question that, just give me a second. Oh yeah, this is about beef. So we had, as I mentioned, Dennis Laycraft for Executive Vice President of the Canadian Cattlemen's Association on the show today, and we're talking about this beef labeling. And I think we're just crossing a nonsensical line. I don't really think that in consumers' hearts today that this is something that they're like, boy, that this is something that, boy, we have to have this. I also get bothered when we hear that we're the only country doing something. I sort of say, why? Like, are we trying to blaze a new trail here? If we're going to blaze a trail, I don't know if this is the trail that I would be necessarily blazing, even if I was super concerned about saturated fat in ground beef, which once again, beef is not a cigarette. I have a hard time getting my head wrapped around that, but I'm quite biased because I'm a big supporter. And by the way, I ate beef last night while we're all keeping score and checking. So what I asked is essentially, is this another example of Canada doing things no other country, which makes the industry as a whole less competitive? Because remember, okay, there's an issue here for consumers. So not only are you increasing costs on domestic producers, the domestic packing industry, domestic retailers to go through and have that kind of labeling, front of package, but I would assume even on imported beef, and we're a big purchaser of U.S. beef, that those imports would have the same rules applied to it, which makes sort of people question, why would we go to your market? Canada's a small market globally in the first place, 38 million people. All this does is add cost. It's the same arguments with mandatory country of origin labeling. At the end of the day, what are you actually trying to accomplish? And in this case, some people have the belief this is a backdoor way to sabotage the beef industry. So let's get to the tweet that I got from Mike. Okay, and Mike says, does the time eventually come when an idea is so asinine and it seems no one is listening to reason to simply smile, nod, and carry on with happy non-compliance? Perhaps then some might get the message that their ideas leave people wanting better. It's a very good question, Mike. I appreciate you raising it. In most circumstances, I really do feel like I would agree. In the case of Health Canada, I just don't know if any major food company, major food retailer would be willing to go down that track. And that's what I kind of replied with here. Health Canada just carries way too big of a stick, and non-compliance is a sort of a path to bigger repercussions that you may say just are not worth it. Mike says, if it be true that the industry had made attempts to engage and was met with no response, the options become limited. Very, very true. I very much agree. And Mike, really appreciate your comments, feedback, and question there for sure. Absolutely. What do you think about all of this? We talked about a lot of stuff here today on RealAg Radio. Got a chance to break it down a little bit more. We didn't even do the top ag news stories today. I had just so much guest time. I couldn't cut anybody short. I apologize. Usually what we've been doing is kind of recapping the top ag news stories today. We've done here today is just kind of recap the stories and talk about how all of this sort of fits together and makes it work. I heard that Willie Van Solkema gave that presentation to Saskatchewan stock growers, and a lot of people that sat there said, okay, that we just won't do this. But maybe somebody out there heard kind of differently. And if you did miss the conversation with Willie that was on today's show, of course, go to realagriculture.com. It is there. Or, of course, you can download the RealAg Radio podcast. Should tell you as well, Friday we have RealAg Politics. We're going to do a new episode. We got some great guests. We're going to have Karen Proud from the Canadian Fertilizer Canadian Fertilizer Institute. Fertilizer Canada. Oh, my goodness. Fertilizer Canada. Karen Proud will be on talking about sanctions on Russian fertilizer, this announcement about the potash production expansion, and also an update on fertilizer emission reduction intentions by the federal government. So we got Karen Proud. We'll also be joined by Alberta Minister of Agriculture and Forestry, Nate Horner. He is going to talk about this beef labeling. He gave a press conference yesterday. So we're having press conferences dedicated to this topic by ministers. So this is grabbing some attention. There's political points to be scored on both sides of the aisle. We'll get Minister Horner's opinion on that. And we're also trying to line up somebody from CFA to talk about the WTO ministerial meetings and give the perspective of the exporting commodities as well as supply management as well. So that is a Friday RealAg Politics, and that is, of course, at 2 p.m. Eastern. So check that out for sure. Hey, really appreciate everybody joining us today for the RealAg After Show. Have yourselves a great day. If you missed RealAg Radio, you don't have to have Sirius. I'll tell you the secret. We're on Rural Radio 147, but you can also download the podcast. You have no excuses. You can check it out. Okay. Cheers, everybody. Have a great night.